Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this, the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. If you want to keep up with all things Clown Decade, please do subscribe to the channel and of course become a channel member. Having said things get worse before they get better, okay, let's be fair, overall this budget is going to be absolutely terrible. We're getting Majora's Mask Dawn of the Final Day vibes, tomorrow's going to be horrible. But there is one small saving grace, and that is that BMW and Mercedes-Benz cars are being removed from the Motability scheme. Premium vehicles will no longer be available under the controversial vehicle leasing program for people with disabilities. Now, over a year ago, just over a year ago maybe, in fact, even a year ago to the day possibly. In fact, I've just checked the timeline, yeah, a year ago. Nobody really knew what the Motability scheme was. I only did because I have family who have managed to get on it. And I will point out at this point that they have a car that actually did need to be modified, putting them in the, I believe it's 10% category, because most of these cars are just leased without any modifications. And given they're for disabled people, you would expect most of them to have to be modified, but, well, they're not. And so this change in scheme will have immediate effect. The Motability operations which run the vehicle leasing scheme designed to help people with disabilities said that the premium brand vehicles would be withdrawn after it emerged that 85% of claimants make additional payments to get a better car, with Audi, Lexus and Alfa Romeo vehicles also having been removed. So it's budget cars to help you get about, which again makes a lot more sense, given that this is supposed to be an operation that helps people with disabilities get about, drive to town, drive to the shops, because obviously they have difficulties walking. Again, that's the point of the PIP payments, which Motability is a offshoot of. If you get enough money on PIP, you can sacrifice some of that for the Motability car. Obviously that's at a discounted price, but you are taking the mickey a bit if you can save up £8,000 or something to end up with an Audi, especially when that is the type of car that Nick 30s, sensitive young men, young professionals let's say, would probably like, and know that it's going to be quite unlikely they'll be able to afford that, given that half their money or more goes on rent, food and of course energy. So why did Motability get such a bad name for itself? Well, it all comes from the anonymous Twitter account Max Tempers, and I do mean all of it. And of all people, it was building off the work of Fraser Nelson, because on the 5th of December, Max Tempers wrote a good piece in the Mail by Fraser Nelson today on just how easy it is to get the full sickness benefits package as long as you're sufficiently duplicitous. It's a system entirely reliant on integrity, say the right words on the telephone call and you're straight through. And I've replied to Max Tempers about this before, but I know people who have had to go through this system and they are remarkably honest. And being remarkably honest means that you are not straight through. It takes over a year to get the benefits that you are entitled to. And this is the problem. There's an obviously large amount of fraud when it comes to this. There's also the problem that Fraser Nelson talks about of people getting trapped in these benefits because, say if you're on universal credit, you effectively lose that straight away if you have a job, even if the job ends up paying you less than universal credit. So guess what you're incentivized to do? Not get a job. You also get benefits if you work less than, I believe, 16 hours a week. Guess what happens if you start working 20 hours a week? You lose that benefit, you end up with less money. Why would you get off that particular benefit? So there's a lot of things to go through, but what Max Tempers did the next day, well, it shook the world as it turned out. Well, on the 6th of December, he made the discovery that nearly 20% of all new car purchases this year, in 2024 that is, were via Motability. The taxpayer is funding this and it's absolutely astonishing. So 1 in 5 cars on the road with a 24 plate on Motability, paid for mostly by the taxpayer. Obviously you make some sacrifice as a person with Motability from the benefits you get to pay for it, but on top of getting the car, you have your insurance paid for, the MOT's paid for. It's, well, in the words of the great Stephen Fry,
"This is a good deal for Britain. A good deal. A good deal. This is a good deal."
Tempers also posted snippets of articles where, well, the statistics were showing that in areas with higher number of people receiving disability benefits, such as South Wales, Central, Eastern Scotland, and Northwest England, Northwest England, oh dear, that's where I'm from, 60 to 70% of a dealer's business is Motability, according to Pidgeonakis, which goes into the whole theory that there are just entire towns in Britain that are completely fake, have absolutely no productivity whatsoever and basically only exist because we have a ridiculous amount of redistribution going on in Britain. We need to accept that some towns will just die if they are not productive. You can only have towns surviving if they are productive. If you lost your industry, a good way some towns have managed to survive is pivoting towards tourism, but that's not your only option. You can redevelop areas to still be industrious, or at least in theory you can. This government has made it very difficult, and subsequent ones before it, to be fair. This is also one of the early tweets where Max Tempers refers to his own network as Tempers Daily, where there is a gigantic industrial policy that we have enacted, subsidies for foreign cars this time, to go with the huge domestic asylum hotel funding. And someone's texted Max Tempers saying the parents of children with ADHD will be able to get a brand new car on Motability to drive them around in. It's a complete scam. My brother sells Hyundai cars and sees the scammers every day. And does he stop the scammers? No, of course he doesn't, because at the end of the day, this guy who sells Hyundai cars ends up getting money for this from the government. Why would he not sell them? On top of that, I can't remember if I've got a thread of Max Tempers mentioning this, but an awful lot of brand new electric cars are sold on the Motability scheme, and that's another incentive for car dealerships to sell them, because there is regulation in place to say 1 in 5 cars they sell has to be electric. What's the best way to do that? Sell it to people who can easily afford it, people on Motability. We have a complete distortion in pretty much every market in Britain. It's absolutely ridiculous to call it capitalist in any way. And yet Zach Polanski's still at double digits in the poll for pretending it is. And on the same day, Max Tempers also posted that this new electric BMW is now available on the Motability scheme. Get it now, Pit brothers and sisters. Help Miliband boost his electric vehicle sales stats, as well as the process. All of this at the taxpayers' largesse. And yeah, I mean, this is why if you see a 2425 plate with an electric vehicle, good chance it's actually a Motability car. It might not be. However, there has definitely been a vibe shift over the past year of seeing cars like this, brand new cars that are electric. It's almost shameful because it has the insinuation it was paid for by working people's taxes in Britain, and it's just not fair at all. And I think it's worth pointing out at this point that this is why Max Tempers is one of the few accounts I would say is a must-follow on Twitter. Because this whole video is about the posting to policy pipeline and how Max Tempers has absolutely perfected it. Typically, he will have good information on what is going on, in this case with Motability. He will get statistics and throw them out to Twitter, while adding on explanations of why this is bad. He follows the basic PEE. What's his point? Motability is a benefit that is absolutely taking the mickey out of the taxpayer. Here's the evidence for that. There's areas where 70% of cars being purchased are on the Motability scheme. That's all at the taxpayer's expense. 85% of new cars, of Motability cars, people have paid extra money to get a more luxurious vehicle than the basic stock. This is unfair ultimately because Nick 30 is never going to be able to afford these luxury cars. Whereas if you blag your way through a few phone interviews, and he's even got evidence that there's an entire industry where doctors will give out sick notes and fake evidence for money, which can be used to get PIP, is even on the conveyor belt of this scam too. You put this all together, you just have an absolute great case study of the government, successive governments I would add, just letting a scam monster grow under their very nose. And it became so undeniable, despite all the abuse that Max Tempers got from people on Motability, that now we are seeing direct reactions right at the top of government. Not just the government, but also all the other parties. Even the Lib Dems have said that maybe, just maybe, benefits are a bit out of control. So of the 4 of the 5 parties we have in main party politics, they're all being effectively led round the nose by Max Tempers. And again, this is all still just stuff that was going on back in December of last year. In fact, the very next day, on December the 7th, fortunately we can rely on Motability's own self-commissioned review to demonstrate the immense value of the operation to society. Turns out most of the game from being given a free car is to go to a questionably calculated well-being metric rather than health or employment. I mean, this is just dodgy statistics. Anyone with a luxury car is going to feel better off than not having one. But in terms of health and employment benefits, it's, well, not really worth the money, as it turns out. Max Tempers even goes into detail on why it's ridiculous the way it's calculated. We use data from Greater Manchester Combined Authority to estimate the wellbeing impact of the Motability car scheme. The original estimates were calculated for the 2009 to 2010 financial year, based on appropriating the willingness to pay value for the QALY impact of depression, £35,400 per annum, across all the domains of wellbeing as set out in the National Accounts of Wellbeing. The 4 domains that monetary valuation were available for were increase to confidence and self-esteem, reduced isolation, positive functioning, and emotional well-being. I mean, I've never seen more of a vibe-based statistic in my life. Again, it's exactly what I said before. Of course people are going to feel better off when they feel like they've had an incredibly good deal on their car. Using the ONS's GDP deflator, well, that's going to be handy, to convert these values to 2020 prices, and rounded down to the nearest 100, the value for increasing confidence and self-esteem, positive functioning and emotional well-being was £4,300 per person a year. The value of reduced isolation was £10,500 per person per year. The reduced isolation one I can understand with getting a car, to be fair, but it's still a ridiculous statistic. I mean, if I were to say in a survey I'd feel a lot better off if given a free house and a free car, why does that then mean I don't get it? Because that is literally what the main argument for continuing Motability in its current state really says. I mean, bear in mind as well, even if you remove luxury cars, you're still getting a pretty good deal on these cars for Motability. And in quite a few cases, I would imagine, it's actually useful to the person going on the Motability scheme. It's just paying for luxury cars at a massively reduced rate is seen as rather unfair by quite a lot of people. To be clear, I don't think Max Tempers has particularly said get rid of Motability in its entirety, especially when he was getting an awful lot of abuse. He had to always clarify, oh, Motability obviously makes some sense. You know, some people are obviously going to need a car to get around if they're disabled and can't afford it, but it should actually be a car that they need converting to help out with them and their Motability issues, and then on top of that, it shouldn't be a BMW. You know, make it a Vauxhall Astra or something. I don't know cars very well, I have no idea if they actually still make them. Or if they're considered budget cars. I really should have looked that up, but I'm not a car person, I just like Top Gear. Tempest goes on to say, they ask people, now you've got a free car, has your employment opportunities been boosted? And then completely fabricate a number. So of the users sampled in the survey, 27.1% stated they had seen a substantial difference in employment opportunities, hence we assume that the 49,711 are recipients in employment, government training, or an apprenticeship scheme. 27... So yeah, they just extrapolate that from a small survey. 27.1% were able to obtain this outcome because they had a vehicle from the scheme. Oh, that's not necessarily the case. So, okay, yeah, they have just made up this number. Combining this figure with the average wage benefit of £17,375, we get a monetary valuation of £234 million in additional wages from Motability customers. Yeah, that's not very good statistics. This is why it's very important to have a methodology in your report, because then we can see, wow, you just made this number up. Per the study, everyone in the country should be given a free car, and we will more than double our GDP in the process. I mean, this is why Max Tempers manages to get these issues pushed to the mainstream. He's funny. He's funny while also making an incredibly good point. I mean, this is part of the idea of this channel too, to be both very, very informative and quite funny. And, well, I think I manage both. This thread goes on. The government, of course, does not regulate or monitor or review or externally audit this process, despite siphoning billions of pounds to them every year. He's even got the evidence. Department does not regulate nor monitor the Motability Scheme's operations or conduct any audits or reviews of its operations. As advised in my reply of 31 October 2024, while the department facilitates the operation of the Motability Scheme by diverting payments of Disability Living Allowance and PIP to meet contract hire payments, it is not directly involved in the administration of the scheme. So Motability has just been off the rails for this sort of thing for ages. Again, this is one of those schemes that just appears to have been allowed to let the tap running with public money for absolutely ages. Again, we had a Tory government in that was supposedly the most right-wing one we've ever had for 14 years. And yet this quite clear scam of Motability with high-end vehicles, nothing was ever done about it. Until, of all people, it's Labour who come in and say, right, no more Beamers on Motability. We have uniquely implemented a gigantic state subsidy regime for foreign cars that is increasingly dominating the new car market in the country, especially boosting electric vehicle sales, and seems to have evolved organically with zero debate or discussion. Well, Mr. Tempers, welcome to generally how the British government works. I'm sure after a year of looking into all this, he knows that. Anyway, early December 2024 is when Max Tempers really started to look into Motability. He riffed on it every now and then over the course of 2025, up to the point where Kemi Badenoch says Brits are getting free cars if they say they're constipated. And Max Tempers obviously quote tweets this saying, "I could never have imagined Motability posting would get us to this point." And it only went to the moon from there. Because while having an electric vehicle with a 2425 plate is a good indication of whether it's a Motability car or not, we wanted more detailed and accurate identification when it comes to Motability. Well, it turns out that Motability actually goes beyond just getting these cars for very cheap. There's actually a quick, easy and free way to check if a new car you come across is a Motability, and that's to run the number plate through the helpful new Dartford Crossing charge check on Gov.uk. Motability cars are exempt from paying the fee, and this isn't the only fee that they are free from paying from. Because again, as mentioned before, you get MOTs for free on it. You get insurance paid for. It makes running a car effectively free. Because bear in mind, you're getting benefit money. Like, that's money from the taxpayer that you're being given, sometimes justifiably, of course, but you're being given for free. It's not for doing anything, it's because of poor circumstances that you might find yourself in, if you're not scamming, of course. Check if that annoying neighbour down the road is really paying for his swanky new car by pressing this button and entering in their number plate. On top of that, Max Tempers either goes on Instagram Reels because he's actually a 20-year-old girl, or gets sent them. However, a woman has bragged about getting a Motability car for narcolepsy. I can't do public transport as I fall asleep randomly and miss my stops, but no worries, here's some keys to a new death machine. Yes, there has been a few threads and arguments with people of why do you get a Motability car when you shouldn't even have a driving licence. I can't find the thread now, but one that always sticks in my mind is that someone was defending the fact they had a Motability car despite the fact that he didn't have any arms. And so the obvious question is, how do you even have a driving licence if you can't turn a wheel? And it turns out that, well, you can get Motability cars in your name, but other people drive you around. That's why children with ADHD can get their parents to get a Motability car. Which, again, isn't exactly seen as fair. And we're still in July here. Need the 1,000-word steelman for why the taxpayer must subsidise Motability convertibles. Because with a massive advance payment of $2,000, that's sarcasm by the way, you can get a 2025 Mazda MX-5 with just 2 seats in it. And has anyone been able to provide reasoning for getting these expensive electric vehicles and these expensive convertibles on the Motability scheme? Effectively, the main argument comes down to, oh, well, you see, because we lease them, 3 years later we lose them to get a new car, and they end up on the second-hand market. These cars wouldn't be on the second-hand market without us. When actually that's just an argument for complete and utter malinvestment. Yes, these cars wouldn't even be made if we actually had a free market. That's a bad thing. That is malinvestment. That is resources going somewhere where the average taxpayer would probably rather keep more of that money to spend on things that they would actually like and see as, well, better for the country than just giving someone who says they have ADHD a car. But there's layers to this, because there is now a great taxi farce. It's one of the clearest tangible examples of a runaway lunacy of Britain's obligations-driven welfare state. Absolutely staggering the amount of money being spent to councils while discretionary services get stripped bare. And so Andy Mahoney, chief executive of 24x7 Group, said he regularly encounters absurd scenarios where one taxi was sent to drive a student to a school 50 miles away, while another was used to ferry pupils in the opposite direction. Mahoney, who runs the only major company in the UK that exclusively provides transport services for special educational needs and disability students, argued that with more central planning, SEND school places could be reallocated so pupils are educated close to home. There are huge efficiencies that can be dealt with, he told the Financial Times. Send transport cost hit £2.26 billion in 2023 to 24, more than double the figure for 2015 to 16, when the data was first recorded, according to the Financial Times analysis of official data for England. Now, you might be asking, what's this got to do with Motability? Well, someone replied saying there will be a scenario where the parents get a Motability car for the child who has SEND needs, but also gets a local government-provided taxpayer-funded taxi, to which Tempers says, yes, and in fact councils legally can't even take into account if a household is in possession of a state-funded Motability car when granting taxi services. On top of that, back in March, Tempers found on a forum that people were expanding this scam so that Motability cars are actually being used as the taxis. So, via Motability forums to witness new infinite money hacks devised daily. Claim a Motability for your child, claim the free taxi service to school that you are still entitled to, incorporate into a taxi company, and then you get paid 70 quid to drop off your child to school in your free Motability car. And again, he's got the evidence there, highlighting the main part. £60 to £70 a day for dropping your own child off to school in a car provided to you by the state. Absolutely incredible. This, by the way, is technically illegal, but again, this stuff isn't audited, nobody checks this stuff. Just don't mention you have a Motability car, and you can carry on with this scam indefinitely. Yeah, there needs to absolutely be a complete and utter audit into this absolutely ridiculous scheme, because there very well are people who will need cars that need a bit of a redesign to help them out with their disability. But for most of them, it's quite clear, no, they don't need it, they just want a cheaper car. Anyway, now we move on to the Motability Checker. There is a network of people around Max Tempers that includes software developers, and with all these different ways we can check whether a car is likely to be on Motability or not, the Dartford Crossing, MOT records, publicly available DVLA files. They can, with a high degree of certainty, guess whether a car is Motability or not, and this has become actually very handy for Max Tempers because something about a crime will come up in the news, and Max Tempers and his team obviously can just run it through the checker. It turns out that the getaway vehicle used in a £1 million heist was actually a Motability Mercedes. Again, there is a desperate need to audit this scheme. Again, everyone who has Motability is not a criminal, however, there seems to be a lot of criminals who take advantage of the Motability scheme. And getting luxury cars stricken off the list, yep, that's a good start, but there's a lot more that needs to be done here. Because then later in October, well, if you zoom and enhance to a car that somehow managed to pile itself over a church wall, you can check the plates on the Motability Checker that's been updated quite a few times to be more and more accurate and get round blocks to the checker that they ran into. Turns out that this car that was being driven like an absolute maniac, yep, it's on Motability. And again, this has been checked by Max Tempers over and over again. Just follow him, you'll see this pretty much weekly. Yeah, Motability cars are everywhere. Seem to be driven by idiots or driven by criminals. Then again, there might be a bit of a to-pay bias here where, that's a car being driven by an idiot, check it, yep, Motability. But then there'll be plenty of cars that are being driven completely normally in these videos that nobody checks and could be Motability too. As I say, just audit this entire thing. Clearly there is large-scale scamming going on, and it's making it more difficult for honest people who need to get on PIP to actually get on the damn thing. I think Reform have it right. Face-to-face checks will be helpful, and also making it slightly harder will be helpful too. And of course, going after the criminals who are writing out fake sick notes and evidence so that people can get on Motability, yep, they need to be checked too. Anyway, this Motability Checker got mainstreamed by the Daily Mail of all papers, where they even made a map to show where the largest number of Motability claims and people on the scheme are actually made. And yep, mainly South Wales, bit in North Wales, North West also has a fair few, and certain areas of the North East too. Places you would expect it. It is, of course, somehow London and areas around the South East that seem to have less claims, though you get to coastal regions and there appears to be more. As you can see here, Tempers is demanding that Rachel Reeves not back down on cuts, and well, he got his wish as it turned out. And as mentioned before, you get to the end of October and Lee Anderson says, if you're on disability and want a car from the state, it was a blue three-wheeler, to which Max Tempers says this is wonderful news, as Lee Anderson is outflanking the Motability multiplier proposals and calls for the return of the three-wheeled Iva car, because it's cheap, reliable, and does help people get around town, which is the point. Anyway, a quick mention of the abuse Max Tempers does get. Obviously, it's mostly in the replies. However, there is a dedicated account called Max Tempers is a Nonce, which just posts nonsense about Max Tempers for days. There's only a single follower, and it happens to be a Whitehall editor over at The Guardian. Blue Sky's also had meltdowns about this, but honestly, I think everyone knows what leftists are like, but this was just the funniest example that I could find of someone having a meltdown about Max Tempers. What the implication is here is that this is run by Rowena Mason, who was, as it shows right there, Whitehall editor of The Guardian. Just incredible. Finally, Max Tempers reacts to the news that the luxury car brands are being stricken off from the Motability scheme, where he celebrates and says, "on your bike." Bit harsh on the disabled, but still it gets his point across. And does correct himself, of course, to say, or soon to be mass-produced Fiat Multipla. And expanding on his celebration, he says, "But you can't just take Beamers off the list. It's an independent charity. We pay for it ourselves and ignore all the tax exemptions. It's actually really, really complicated. There's been hours of wasted discussion, and it turns out you can literally just get rid of it all with immediate effect. The Canary, The Guardian, the one with a lot of tattoos, the short Irish guy that blocked me, you boys took a hell of a beating." And I do not blame Max Tempers for gloating like this. In under a year, Max Tempers brought the attention of Motability scams to the forefront of British politics and managed to get a result from it. How many people in the online right can say that? Not many. Drupka Cunley? Yeah. His Mythos UK account certainly does seem to be pushing the narrative in certain directions. Tempers, well, there's no doubt of it here. This is a whole story from beginning to end of how his Motability posting has managed to end up with some decent policy. The push from Adam Wren when it came to the grooming gangs. Max Tempers obviously helped with it, but Adam does deserve credit for it. It got a lot of the horrible crimes into the mainstream once again, and from there forced Labour into corners it couldn't get out of. It's not been a great result, but then again, there's a lot to hide there, so, credit where it's due. He's at least helped keep it in the media. And I suppose this is the overall point I want you to take away from this video. Posting to policy is a real thing. Max Tempers is the greatest example of it. And it's not just this that he has had success with. As mentioned, he helped out with the grooming gang cases and also brought to the attention of international news the fact that Labour was sending over activists to help out with the Kamala Harris campaign, which highly embarrassed Labour, of course. And there's a whole network of people with Anon accounts on Twitter who are managing to post, get the attention of journalists and of politicians, and it ends up with a lot of virtue signalling in our direction. It is a great win. It's something that I've covered a couple of times before, but I think it's good to have an entire video showing how the posting to policy pipeline works best. Have your point, make it simple, make it concise, don't expand the scope. From there, constantly find evidence and post it when you do find it. Look at these ridiculous luxury cars. Look at the fact that we now have a checker for Motability. Look at the type of people driving them. Clearly there is fraud going on, and clearly these vehicles are being used for nefarious reasons too, along with the taxi scam. It took half a year for the Tories to start mentioning it. Obviously, Zia Yusuf was also posting about it a little bit on Twitter too, until it became part of official policy, at least in a very tongue-in-cheek way, that obviously there should be no luxury vehicles and it should be very basic cars to help people get around in. Not necessarily three-wheelers, as I say, it's tongue-in-cheek. But having simple British cars for this particular scheme makes a lot more sense than luxury European brands. And that seems to be the route to success. Tell the truth, have a lot of evidence for the truth that you are telling, and make the whole thing fun, exciting and funny. It's very Alinskyite, really. And so I'll end this video by massively congratulating Max Tempers for all the work he has done. And I hope, obviously, that it continues. Right, I think with that we've covered everything I need to cover for this video. So if you enjoyed it and enjoy what I do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. You can also leave super chats and super thanks and become a channel member. They all really help out the channel, and I appreciate absolutely everyone who sends their hard-earned money for my little hobby. In terms of streams, Wednesday it's the gaming stream, Deus Ex Human Revolution. I'll be carrying on with that with the massive audience that randomly turns up at 10:30 for some reason. And then over on... No, it's on my channel. What am I talking about? I run the Walls of Westminster podcast. That's out on Friday. And I think with that, I will leave it there. Right. Thank you all very much for watching. Congratulations to Max Tempers. And until next time, goodbye.